Dr. Greer, your reactions to the presentations.
Yes, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your great work and for sharing the presentations. And I'm glad to see that you added some more stuff. And I really appreciated both of your talks and the points you made. I just wanted to note a couple of things. Historically, atheism has always been a reaction against a particular conception of the divine. That's been shown by, for instance, the historian of God and religion, Karen Armstrong, in the work, A History of God, speaking about the three major God religions. And what we find, of course, today with many of our atheists is that these people are, in fact, reacting against a particular conception of the divine. Now, to me, it's interesting, in fact, what Paul did do with the materialists of his time. In fact, he argued with the Epicureans, as you pointed out. But in fact, there is a lot of Stoic philosophy in Paul that he cites. For instance, in the text which you cited in Romans 1, where it says that God, that from the beginning of the creation, even his eternal power and deity, even his divine nature, he has shown in the things he has made. Notice that it did not say his divine actions are shown. It said his divine nature. In other words, there's something about the universe itself that reveals God's nature, and not him as a tinkerer within a system, but as greater than, including the system. And part of the difficulties, I think, that we have with this discussion, and it's very interesting that when we talk about scientists, it just so happens that about 40% of practicing scientists do believe in a personal God who answers prayer. Okay, so in fact, the culture wars have given us some distorted views about who scientists are and about who the opposition is. And very often, one of the things that happens in the culture wars, and it's really unfortunate because this has hindered the progress both of science and of the dialogue that could happen, is that people fall into the either-or fallacy. Things are all either this way or they're this way. And one of the things that we see, for instance, when you pointed out the metaphysical statements that have been made by people like Carl Sagan and Richard Dawkins, who I recently talked to, actually, when he was down in Caltech, and I asked him, I said, so what do you feel about, because his latest book, The God Delusion, spends a lot of time going into all the evils that have happened in the name of religion and everything. I said, so what do you think about, how do you feel about liberal religion being a stepping point, helping to pull people away from the extremes of fundamentalism and everything? He said something very interesting and revealing to me personally, which is not in his book. He said, I can respect that, he said. It's not what I do. Okay? Very, very revealing. But all of the statements that you pointed out there, they were making religious statements because they were talking about metaphysical naturalism. Whereas, as scientists, we have to, in the lab, we have to deal with sort of the methodological naturalism, and then we have to say, well, at a certain point, questions that cannot be answered by the method we have chosen, because we can't just simply invoke a miracle, and still say, well, I'm describing a process which I can explain to you. People of faith can do it, of course, but others cannot. And what they continually kept doing was mingling and mixing up the two. So when Promeyer or when Sagan, etc., when they were saying certain statements, they were in fact making religious statements. And I think once we get that clarified, and once we recognize that we don't have to choose, of course, between Dawkins and Dembski, because when Dembski, for instance, in his book on intelligent design said, in fact, he said, what we want to do by this is to resurrect the ethical stream that flows from Aristotle to Thomas Aquinas in Western civilization. Now, for those of us who are, as Adventists, we have our concerns about theocracy and so forth. And what is the ethical stream that leads from Aristotle to Thomas Aquinas? It's the ethical stream that gave us the Crusades and the Inquisition and the religious wars and various things like that. It is that kind of language which hinders the dialogue, which can be very fruitful on this when you have people on both sides taking an extreme position on a number of things. And so it is possible to believe in an intelligent designer who made the universe and to see his intelligence in the laws of nature itself, as well as in the processes going on within nature, and to not pit one off against the other. I just wanted to, on one point, Michael Behe's claim that no papers had ever been published, even postulating a particular path by which evolution could have brought, let's say, some complex systems like the immune system, and so forth. You may be aware that at the Dover trial, he was called on the carpet pretty strongly for that because of a whole suite of papers which he just chose, which he didn't mention, which had been published by 1996 when the Black Box came out. And I think that one thing that we have to be careful about is to make sure that we recognize that in fact the types of extremes that can happen in the polemics are not particularly helpful to us. That's just one thing. There's a number of things I'd like to comment on, but I've said enough for that.